Emily Sanders had always believed her life in Seattle was steady, predictable, and safe. She worked at a small design studio, she cooked dinner every night, and she tried her best to blend into the quiet routine of her new family after marrying Daniel, a man she trusted deeply, and becoming stepmother to his grown son, Alex, who was polite but distant in a way that suggested he had learned to build walls early in life. Their relationship was respectful, short conversations in passing, gentle nods across the room, nothing more, nothing complicated, until one cold winter evening shifted everything without warning, and that moment would become the turning point she never saw coming. Emily came home early that night because a power outage at work shut the office down, and she expected the house to be empty, peaceful, maybe even a moment to relax before Daniel came home late as usual, but when she walked in, she noticed the house was strangely quiet, no TV, no music. Just the soft hum of the heating system, yet a thin strip of light shined out from beneath Alex's bedroom door, something that immediately caught her attention because Alex rarely kept his door partly open. She moved closer, unsure whether to disturb him, but instinct told her something was wrong, something she couldn't name yet. She tapped on the door gently and pushed it open only a little, expecting to find him studying or talking to friends online, but instead she saw him sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, his shoulders shaking slightly, his hands gripping a stack of papers that had spilled across the carpet like fallen leaves, each sheet face down, hiding whatever was written on them. Emily stepped inside carefully, speaking softly the way people do when they're afraid the wrong tone might break someone already hurting. When Alex lifted his face, she froze, because his eyes were red and wet, not the anger red she'd seen before in young men trying to hide frustration, but the exhausted, defeated red of someone trying not to fall apart. He didn't try to hide the papers, he simply watched her with a look that said he had been carrying something alone for too long. Emily lowered herself to the floor without asking permission, her heart tightening as she picked up one page near her knee, and the moment her eyes scanned the first few lines, her breath caught: hotel confirmations, private emails, messages written with a tone too familiar, too intimate, words from Daniel, her husband, to another woman. She looked at Alex, unsure what to say, unsure how to hold her own emotions inside when her marriage was cracking open right in front of her, but Alex spoke before she could ask anything. "I didn't want to show you," he whispered, his voice tight, the kind that trembles not because of fear but because of heartbreak, "but I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal." Emily felt a sharp wave of shock, followed by a slow, heavy sadness, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she focused on the young man in front of her, the one who had been quiet for months, the one who kept his distance because he didn't want to create problems, the one she had thought barely noticed her presence in the home. Now she realized he had noticed everything, maybe more than she ever did. She asked him how long he had known, and Alex shook his head, staring at the carpet as he explained how he accidentally found a strange email weeks before, then kept digging, hoping he was wrong, hoping his father wasn't doing what the evidence clearly showed. Emily listened, not interrupting, not defending Daniel, not collapsing even though her heart felt bruised, because she could see how much this cost Alex to share. She could feel how long he had been holding it in, alone, afraid of hurting her but also unable to pretend nothing was happening. For the first time since she married Daniel, she saw Alex not as a stepson who kept his distance, but as a young man who had been protecting her in silence, unsure how to break something that would break her too. The room felt heavy, not with anger but with truth, raw, painful truth that demanded to be seen. Emily placed the papers down slowly, her hand steady even though her chest ached. She reached out and squeezed Alex's shoulder lightly, a gesture she had never made before but one that felt natural in that moment, and she told him softly, "You didn't hurt me. The truth did. And I'm glad you didn't go through this alone." He blinked hard, nodding, as if relieved she didn't blame him for revealing what he wished had never been real. They stayed there on the floor for several minutes, letting the quiet settle, letting the truth breathe in the room, both of them processing the same betrayal but from different angles, she as a wife realizing her trust had cracked, he as a son facing the disappointment he had spent years trying to escape. Emily finally stood up, gathering the papers calmly, her mind racing not with anger but with clarity, a clarity that whispered, this was the moment everything changed. She didn't know what she would do next or how she would confront Daniel, but she did know one thing with certainty, her relationship with Alex had shifted permanently, no longer polite distance, no longer the quiet space between stepmother and stepson, but something deeper, a connection born from truth, honesty, and shared heartbreak. And as she glanced back at him before leaving the room, she felt the first flicker of something unexpected, a sense that this moment, painful as it was, would redefine not just her marriage, but her entire family in ways she couldn't yet understand. This was the night everything broke open. And this was the night she and Alex began seeing each other not as strangers living under one roof, but as two people standing on the same side of a truth they never asked for but could no longer avoid. After that painful night, Emily woke up with a heavy mind, her thoughts rushing in circles as she tried to accept that the life she trusted was not what it seemed. Yet she pulled herself together because she knew she needed to stay steady for Alex, who had carried the truth alone for far too long. When she walked into the kitchen, she found him sitting at the table with a mug of untouched coffee, staring at nothing, clearly lost in the same storm she was trying to navigate. Emily sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke, but there was a quiet understanding between them, something gentle and unspoken that made the silence feel almost warm instead of cold. She reached for one of the printed pages he had laid on the table, scanning the messages again, this time not with shock but with a slow, painful acceptance. She asked him how he managed to hold all this inside, and Alex sighed, rubbing his forehead, explaining that he had tried to ignore it at first, hoping it was a misunderstanding, hoping his father would correct himself, hoping loyalty would win over temptation, but every day the evidence grew more clear, and he felt caught between protecting his father and protecting a woman who had always treated him with simple kindness. Emily listened carefully, grateful for his honesty, and slowly she realized this wasn't just about her losing trust in her husband, it was also about a young man silently watching his father repeat old mistakes, mistakes that had already damaged their relationship long before she married into the family. Alex admitted he always had a strained bond with Daniel, built on half-kept promises and emotional distance, and now seeing his father repeat the same patterns broke something inside him too. He told Emily he had debated for days whether to tell her because he didn't want to be the reason her marriage fell apart, yet he couldn't stand by and watch her smile every day while carrying a lie that wasn't hers to carry. Emily felt her eyes warm at his confession, not from heartbreak over Daniel but from the unexpected depth she saw in Alex, the emotion he had hidden behind his quiet, polite manner. She realized he had been hurting long before. This night, hiding years of disappointment behind closed doors and short conversations. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing naturally in a way it never had before, as if the truth opened a doorway between them that neither had dared to step through earlier. He told her about moments from childhood when he watched his parents' marriage crumble, how it taught him to stay guarded, and how he promised himself he would never let anyone get too close because closeness only led to hurt. And as Emily listened, she felt a deep ache not for herself but for him, for all the pain he had carried without support. She shared her own story too, how she had lost trust before in past relationships, how she always believed people could change if they loved hard enough, and how she had tried to build a peaceful home with Daniel, not knowing the cracks were already forming behind her back. As they opened up to each other, the room felt lighter, not because the situation was any less painful but because they were no longer carrying their fears alone. Emily realized that the young man sitting across from her wasn't distant at all, he was simply someone who had never been given the space to speak honestly, and now that he finally had that space, his words came out with both caution and relief. When he apologized again for showing her the truth, she placed her hand over his briefly, a small, steady gesture, and told him he did the right thing, that honesty, even when painful, is a form of care. For a moment, Alex lowered his head, as if the weight of the past weeks was finally lifting from his shoulders, and Emily saw the first real sign of peace on his face since she walked into his room the night before. After their long talk, they gathered the papers, organizing them neatly, as if preparing themselves for what would come next. Emily wasn't sure what she would say to Daniel or when, but she knew she wasn't afraid anymore. Not because the pain was gone but because she wasn't facing it alone. The bond between her and Alex, once fragile and distant, now felt surprisingly strong, built not on forced family roles but on shared truth and mutual respect. Later that evening, as they sat in the living room, Emily noticed how the house no longer felt cold or unfamiliar. something warm had begun to grow between them, a sense of trust, a connection shaped by honesty rather than obligation. Alex offered to help her with anything she needed in the days ahead, his voice steady, carrying a quiet strength she had never noticed before. Emily thanked him, feeling a strange mix of sadness, gratitude, and hope all at once. She didn't know what the future looked like, but she knew one thing for certain: the distance between her and her stepson had disappeared, replaced by a bond she didn't expect but deeply appreciated. And as she turned off the lights before bed that night, she felt something shift inside her, not the loss of a marriage, but the beginning of a new understanding, the beginning of a strange but meaningful connection with Alex, who was no longer just her stepson but someone who understood her pain, her disappointment, and her strength better than anyone else. The truth that broke her trust had also built something new, something honest, steady, and unexpectedly comforting, and though she had no idea what tomorrow would bring, she knew she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The morning after the long night of shared truths, Emily woke with a sense of quiet determination, knowing that today could not be filled with avoidance or fear, and she found Alex already awake in the kitchen, sitting quietly, sipping coffee, his eyes tired but alert, carrying the weight of yesterday with the kind of silent strength that made her heart ache for him, and together they prepared for what everyone knew had to happen: the confrontation with Daniel, the man whose actions had shattered the trust of both his wife and his son, a confrontation Emily dreaded yet knew could no longer be postponed, so she gathered herself, making sure her voice would stay calm and steady, her hands firm as she held the folder of evidence that had caused the heartache but now felt like a shield for the truth. And when Daniel finally stepped through the front door, cheerful and unsuspecting, Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable yet resolute, while Alex positioned himself nearby, not as a passive observer but as someone ready to stand beside her, sharing the burden that had been so long hidden. Daniel greeted them, unaware, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the low morning light filtering through the blinds, and Emily didn't waste a moment. She placed the folder on the table with deliberate calm and said clearly, "Daniel, we know everything." His face turned pale instantly, eyes widening, as if the ground had shifted beneath him, and he stumbled over words, trying to deny, explain, excuse, anything to regain control. But Emily didn't interrupt him, and Alex didn't flinch. They let the words spill, but the evidence remained, undeniable and stark, papers and messages that told a story Daniel could no longer rewrite. Emily spoke again, her voice steady: "This family deserves better, and we won't accept anything less." And when she said the word family, Alex felt a surge of emotion, realizing for the first time that he was part of something stronger than secrets, stronger than broken promises, and it was a moment of clarity for both of them. Daniel tried to argue, to justify, to plead, but Emily listened without anger, only with the quiet power of someone who had seen the truth and refused to look away. And Alex realized that she had become the anchor he had been waiting for, the person who would stand firm while he found his own strength, and together, mother and stepson formed a silent pact that nothing would break them again, even if the other relationships in the house collapsed around them. After what felt like hours, Daniel finally left the house, muttering apologies, desperate to escape the confrontation, and Emily sank into a chair, exhausted but not defeated, while Alex quietly sat beside her, neither of them needing to speak, because the presence of one another was enough to absorb the shock, the disappointment, and the heartbreak that still lingered in the air. That day passed slowly, each moment heavy with reflection and the realization that the foundation of their lives had shifted irreversibly. Yet amidst the sadness, a new connection deepened between Emily and Alex, a bond forged in honesty, courage, and mutual understanding, one that was no longer defined by titles like stepmother or stepson but by the simple truth that they were allies in the face of betrayal. As evening fell, they moved around the house together, completing small tasks that reminded them that life continued despite the pain: dishes washed, laundry folded, rooms tidied, each action carrying a quiet strength, a sense of normalcy in the middle of chaos. And Emily began to notice small moments she hadn't before: the way Alex paused to help, the way he watched her with concern, the way his presence was both comforting and grounding, and she realized that the shock of the confrontation had also opened a door to a relationship she had never expected to have, one built not on blood, but on shared experience and emotional honesty. They talked late into the night, discussing not Daniel's actions but how they would move forward, how they would protect themselves from future hurt, how they could support each other without fear or pretension, and in these conversations, Emily felt the stirrings of something rare, a connection born entirely from trust and respect, the kind of connection that could withstand future challenges because it had already endured the worst. Alex admitted moments of fear, moments of anger at his father, moments when he didn't know how to cope, and Emily responded with gentle guidance and reassurance, validating his feelings while showing him that even in a fractured family, care and love could exist in new forms, separate from the mistakes that had caused so much pain. By the end of the night, Emily realized that she had discovered a new role in this family, not as the spouse of someone unfaithful, but as a steady presence, a safe harbor for a young man whose trust had been tested repeatedly, and Alex recognized that he could rely on her not as a parent, but as someone who understood him, who would not abandon him in the face of betrayal. They didn't talk about forgiveness yet, because that was a long road, but they acknowledged their unity, the unspoken promise that they would face the coming days together, side by side, with clarity and strength. That night, the house was quiet in a different way, not the quiet of denial or hiding, but the quiet of understanding and resilience, and as Emily turned off the lights and went to her room, she glanced at Alex's door, seeing him already asleep, and felt a sense of relief she hadn't felt in months, knowing that no matter what happened with Daniel, she wasn't facing the heartbreak alone, and that Alex wasn't alone either. The confrontation had been painful, but it had also revealed something invaluable, a bond formed in truth, a mutual respect that neither had anticipated, a shared understanding that family wasn't just about blood or marriage, but about who stood beside you when everything else fell apart, and for the first time since discovering the betrayal, Emily felt a flicker of hope that they could rebuild their lives, not perfectly, not immediately, but with honesty and care, and that flicker would grow into a steady flame in the days to come, a flame of connection and resilience, a promise that the night that broke them apart had also begun the process of healing, and that even in the shadow of infidelity, something lasting and meaningful could emerge if they faced it together. The days after the confrontation were heavy with emotion, yet Emily and Alex moved through them with a quiet determination, realizing that life had changed forever and that their family would need to be rebuilt in ways they hadn't expected. And while Daniel had stepped out of the house temporarily, leaving a vacuum of uncertainty and sadness, Emily refused to let despair control her, focusing instead on what she could manage, the home, Alex, and her own healing. And the first morning after the confrontation, she found Alex already in the kitchen preparing breakfast, moving with a calm purpose, showing a resilience that made her heart ache with both pride and empathy. And as they shared a simple meal, neither of them spoke of the past betrayal directly, but the silence carried understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that the events of the last week had shifted the entire dynamic of their lives. Emily suggested they spend the day together doing small tasks around the house, and Alex agreed, and as they painted walls, fixed leaky faucets, and reorganized shelves, they laughed quietly at shared mistakes and moments of frustration, slowly weaving a thread of normalcy and comfort into a space that had been filled with tension and heartbreak. And Emily realized that these ordinary moments, though simple, were profound, each one a step toward healing, each one a chance to rebuild trust and connection that Daniel's betrayal had threatened to destroy. That evening, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the cold Seattle rain fell gently, the rhythmic sound soothing rather than sad, and Alex spoke softly about his feelings, admitting that he had been scared to see Emily hurt, that he had felt helpless, and that he now realized the importance of honesty and support in a family. And Emily responded with gentle words, telling him she was proud of his courage and that he had shown more strength than he knew, not because he had confronted Daniel but because he had trusted her enough to share the truth. And in that conversation, they both felt a closeness that had never existed before, one built on shared vulnerability, trust, and understanding. Over the next weeks, Emily began to take small steps to reclaim her own life while remaining supportive of Alex, helping him with college plans, job searches, and personal challenges, and in turn, Alex helped her with her home projects, grocery shopping, and even organizing her design work at home, and each act of cooperation strengthened their bond, forming a partnership that transcended traditional family roles, moving from a formal stepmother-stepson relationship to a genuine connection rooted in care and respect, a relationship that gave them both hope and a sense of stability that had been missing for so long. Emily realized she had become more than just a parent figure or spouse. She had become a confidant, a guide, and a source of support, someone Alex could rely on when life felt uncertain, and Alex, in turn, had become more than just her stepson. He was a partner in rebuilding their lives, someone who listened, helped, and shared his own strength, and together they navigated each challenge with patience, learning to communicate openly without judgment, sharing both worries and small joys, and discovering a rhythm of daily life that felt safe, nurturing, and surprisingly comforting. On one quiet evening, Emily and Alex sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, reflecting on how much had changed, and Alex admitted that he had always felt distant from his father because of broken promises and a lack of emotional presence, but now he understood that family could be defined differently, that family could be chosen through care, honesty, and support, and Emily agreed, feeling a deep sense of relief and gratitude that despite the betrayal and heartbreak, something real and lasting had emerged, a bond that was stronger for having endured the pain together. Emily also began to see her own growth. She realized she no longer felt trapped by her marriage or dependent on Daniel for emotional stability. She had discovered her own strength, her ability to love and care beyond conventional boundaries, and her capacity to form meaningful relationships based on trust and mutual respect. And Alex saw the same growth in himself, feeling empowered to stand independently while still cherishing the connection they had developed, and in the quiet moments of the day, they would share small conversations about life, dreams, and fears, finding laughter, comfort, and a sense of belonging that neither had expected. Slowly, the house transformed into a home, not because of Daniel's presence, but because of the emotional work Emily and Alex invested in it, and every shared meal, chore, and conversation added layers to their bond, proving that love and care could survive even after betrayal, and that family could exist in new, unanticipated ways when honesty and support guided the way. Emily noticed that Alex's confidence had grown. He spoke more freely, smiled more often, and even initiated small gestures of kindness, like making coffee for both of them or leaving notes of encouragement, and these actions made Emily's heart swell with pride and hope, and she realized that their relationship had shifted from dependence and politeness to a partnership of equals, each one offering strength and compassion to the other. They began to make plans for the future, discussing how they would handle Daniel's eventual return, how they would set boundaries, and how they would continue supporting each other no matter what. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Emily and Alex felt ready to face it together, having built a foundation of trust that could withstand challenges and setbacks, and the lessons of honesty, courage, and care that had emerged from the betrayal were now guiding them toward healing and connection. One rainy night, as they sipped tea in the living room, Emily reflected on the journey, realizing that the night Alex had first shown her the truth, which had seemed like the darkest moment of her life, had in fact been the beginning of something transformative, a turning point where despair turned into hope, distance turned into closeness, and betrayal turned into an opportunity to form a real, lasting bond. And Alex, noticing her contemplative mood, simply said, "I'm glad we faced this together," and Emily smiled softly, feeling the warmth of that truth settle in her heart, understanding that family was no longer just about blood or marriage, but about those who stand by you in times of pain. And that night, the rain outside mirrored the calm in her heart, a steady, soothing rhythm that reminded her that even after heartbreak, love, trust, and connection could flourish when nurtured with honesty, care, and patience. And as they turned off the lights and went to their separate rooms, Emily knew that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where she and Alex were no longer just stepmother and stepson, but two people who had discovered the true meaning of family through shared struggle, understanding, and unwavering support.